It doesn't feel like we're achieving very much here. Poor Erica's just sitting here day after day with not very much happening, mainly whilst I'm sitting scrolling through a computer screen trying to decide on things to buy, realising it's very much a weakness of mine making decisions, so it's taking far longer than it should to get things on order. Things are now on order, but still not everything we need to actually really start work in earnest. The order of events is that I need to decide where the wires are running and run those wires. We need to get the insulation in them before we can do any building. However, one thing we can do is this floor, the trough behind me, is currently completely uninsulated. The flooring that you can see here is the hard wearing vinyl flooring on top of wood on top of a gap. However, in the middle of the trough it is just the vinyl flooring onto the metal. So we're going to put some batons in there, a wood floor, a little bit of insulation in between them, not too much because we don't want to lose the height, and we've come to the decision that that is something we can usefully do right now. It's not going to impinge on anything else. So first task today is a little bit of cleaning. Our two options for putting the batons down on which the floor is going to lie is to screw them or to glue them. If we screw them, we're obviously making holes in the floor that's been added in, this trough that's been added in the middle of the vehicle, and I don't really want to do that, so we're going to glue them down, which means we do need to make sure that this existing floor is very clean before we go ahead and do that. Whilst I've been on my hands and knees scrubbing that floor, it's occurred to me that our plan was to glue the batons onto that hard-wearing lino sort of substance that's already there. And I've just realised the flaw in that plan, that we have no idea how well that floor is actually adhered to the metal below. It seems really well adhered, but we're going to be mounting furniture on the batons that are glued to that. And in the event of a sudden stop and impact, would that mean that the furniture would just come flying straight up because the batons might remain attached to the lino, but the lino would undoubtedly rip up. Now, we have mitigated that issue quite considerably, because you may recall when we took the seats out, we were left with these mounting points. And we intend to bolt the frames of the furniture, build the furniture in such a way that we can bolt into those holes. So our furniture is actually going to be more substantially mounted than your average camper van conversion, in that we're going into holes that with the same appropriate bolts that were previously crash tested for an NHS vehicle for carrying patients on seats. So we're quite confident that the furniture will be well adhered there. But that does still concern me a little bit about the floor in the middle and the mounting points we're going to use there. So contrary to my original thoughts, I'm thinking we might have to just put a couple of 3 screws in, just to make sure that there's some extra support for those batons that are holding the floor. I've just had another little crawl into the vehicle, and the sides of the trough go up against structural parts of the frame of the vehicle. So the only way we can screw, I was thinking maybe I'd prefer to screw through the sides of the trough, but no, that's not going to be feasible, because I then won't be able to get behind to treat with some rust-proofer and protection the back of the screws. So it looks like we're going to have to screw down through the floor, obviously being careful with the length of the screw and making sure we're not hitting anything below there. And in the meantime, this floor is very shiny and clean, and that water is very dirty indeed.
Well, today's plan is to try and put the flooring down in the cutout. She's not been run over, Gail is underneath the van at the moment, inspecting the floor of the vehicle to try and work, and having a quick look to see where any exhaust, fuel, hydraulics, brake pipes, that type of stuff go, to make sure we don't damage them.
I then got on with cutting the support battens for the floor, having first had a fight with the chop saw to remove the very blunt blade that had become firmly wedged onto its anchor to replace it with a nice new one. You'll notice in all of the cutting footage here that the task would have been quicker and easier if I'd had an extra pair of hands, but I didn't want to call Mick away from his design drawing, so I made do with the clamp. The following day, whilst in B&Q, I bought a small quick release clamp, and the day after that Mick was in B&Q and bought me 2 more as an excellent surprise. I now wonder how I managed for 20 odd years with those not quick release clamps. This is the first piece of wood that I've just cut, and the question is, did I cut it to the right length? I think that needs a little bit of trimming at an angle. I thought the easiest way to work out that angle was, rather than trying to measure, was just a bit of trial and error. So I set the saw to 15 degrees, taken a cut, taken it out to Erica. Looks pretty good, so I'm going to go for it on the real thing. I think I'm prepared to say that that is perfect. So that is as good as a 15-degree angle on there. What you can see looking along is that we have got some of the most warped wood. This is actually one of the straighter pieces. We tried various shops and only B&Q had any left, and they had the pieces that nobody else wanted, which were rather warped. And so Hobson's choice really. Doesn't really particularly matter for our purposes. We can straighten them out a little bit with fixings, but if they're a bit wibbly, it's still going to support the floor. That's the 4 lengths of wood all cut to length. Obviously not screwed or fixed down in any way yet. The next thing I'm going to do is use that little bit of plywood that I've got sitting there. I'm going to cut a wedge shape to fill in the edges of this ramp. I said I was going to use this piece of wood without in any way having measured to see if it was an appropriate size, but it seems that my eye gauged it quite well, because it's probably about a centimetre short of ideal, but perfectly adequate. So now I'm just going to put that piece of wood up against it, draw a line underneath to give me the cut line going across, work out where the line needs to go on that side, and then I'll go and cut it. At some point I'm going to cut a piece of wood ridiculously wrong, but I have to say this first one that I've cut, as well as the 4 pieces to go along the floor, I am pretty pleased with that. So now I just need to replicate that for the other side, and then another couple for the middle. I was so proud of myself when I cut these pieces of wood, that they fitted exactly on the ends. The angle was right. I don't think I could have achieved a better fit. I did the same with the one on that side. Again, perfect fit. So I cut the 2 pieces of wood for the middle to be the same length, and they indeed fit perfectly on the outside against that lip. But then there's something that I hadn't thought about. And what I hadn't thought about was that the ramp, when it's in its stowed position as it is now, doesn't go all the way to the line that I used for the outer 2 pieces. So now the inner 2 pieces are too short, which isn't the end of the world, because I do need to put some cross struts in, so I will put one right at that end, and that will cause these to push up against the ramp.
This is the plan of the trough. What we want to do is glue and screw the battens down, but we don't know what's on the underside of the vehicle. So Gail's gone under there and measured stuff, and we've come up with the blue box is the trough from inside the vehicle. and underneath are some supports, some metal beams, and there's a metal beam that runs along here, and there's a metal beam that runs along here, and there's two longitudinal beams that run down from top to bottom that strengthen the floor that was put in for the wheelchair access part.
You would not believe how long we've spent today working out where to put all of these beams on the floor. The one that's important is this one here, because that one is going to be the support for the front of the sofa and we're going to be screwing into that one. The others doesn't particularly matter, but even though they're going to be completely covered, it was always going to be nice to put this one halfway between those two. And there's certain things we need to miss underneath. So we have spent a ridiculous length of time, rather than just eyeballing it, saying that's okay, working out exactly where to put those. But it's all now done and cut, and all we need to do now is glue and screw. I've put a slide of lessons learnt at the end of this video, but one of those lessons was we shouldn't have cut the cross pieces until we had the lengths in place, because we impulsively decided to shuffle a couple of the lengths across, which meant we had to recut the cross pieces. When it came to fixing the lengths, we also shouldn't have started with the most important piece, the only one on which furniture will be mounted. We should have learnt valuable lessons on the less important batons first. Half an hour was also lost in fitting that first long batten, because in positioning the first screw we only had a small margin for error in making sure we missed the fuel tank on the one side and a structural cross member on the other. So I spent another period wriggling round underneath, without Erica up on ramps this time, which made it a tight squeeze, making absolutely sure that we hit the right place. In this snap the screw looked scarily close to the fuel tank, but as my father always used to say, a miss is as good as a mile. We got a couple of screws in on Friday evening, but amongst my collection of dozens of drill bits I could only find one of the right size and type for the pilot holes through the floor, and it became clear that drill bit was well past its best. We'd also established that self-drilling screws were not man enough for the metal sheet that makes up the floor of the trough, so it seemed like a good time to call it a day. Mick nipped into town for a new drill bit and a few other bits and pieces, whilst I rustled us up a sumptuous feast of an evening meal. We had hoped to have that floor down on Friday, but we're well acquainted with the fact that making and fixing things generally takes about twice as long as the timescale first thought of. So here we are, resuming on Saturday morning, determined that we would have a floor down by the end of the day. I'm sure you get the idea by now, so I'll just skip forward here to the final placing of the cross pieces. When we bought the wood the other day, I thought that we needed 4 lengths. Mick suggested we should get 5, and I'll just show you what we have left over. That one has a use, we just haven't put it in yet. The scraps we have left over are there. So there we go, Mick was absolutely correct. So far on this breezy and only slightly sunny Saturday morning, we've glued all of the batons to the floor. We've screwed them where we think that supporting screws are needed, just to give it that extra bit of strength, bearing in mind that there's going to be furniture bolted into these holes, which will actually also sit on that batten, so there'll be quite a lot of support to the floor. So we didn't think that very many screws were needed just to give it that extra stability. We've then cut some insulation, and we've gone for just a couple of layers of closed cell foam. We only had 12mm of depth, so we couldn't put any solid insulation. It wasn't worth putting in loose fill in that depth. and we just happen to have a large roll of this closed cell foam lying around. A little bit more progress has been made. We've now cut the insulation, 2 layers of, for the storage area at the back, and I'm just in the process of foil taping around the edges to form a vapour barrier to the floor underneath. I have cut cardboard because there's going to be no weight on this underfloor storage area. That piece of cardboard is just going to slide in there. I'm just going to screw it on, and remember the floor is then going to be across the top of this, so this won't actually be seen. It's now even later in the day, and we now have all 3 of those bits of the storage compartment floor down, insulated under, fully taped up, and we're now just putting a layer of this foil on, not for any sort of insulation on this layer. This is purely for a vapour barrier. So we're now going to tape that all the way around the edges. We've had traumatic times today applying this aluminium tape down there because the angles were such that it was always going to be difficult. This line across here was really easy because it's flat and it's just running some tape along. I thought that one being a right angle would be relatively easy, but no, that was a bit of a nightmare too, and it's a good job that's going to be hidden behind the bed. We're going to need a bit of trimming along there. And then this one, which is also going to be visible, so that's going to need some trimming, was going really badly until on the second piece that I put in, having decided that short sections are the way forward. On the second piece I suddenly tweaked what the method is, having done almost all of the floor, and that is to put a good crease in the tape before you start removing the backing. And I don't know if you can see here, this is the final bit, so it's already got the crease in there, and then it goes on a lot more smoothly. When I bought the 50-metre roll of foil tape, I naively thought it'd be plenty, but it turns out we needed a surprisingly large amount of the stuff, considering we were only working in a 2 metre by 0.7 of a metre space, so before we get the walls done we're likely going to need more tape. And what you see here is about a day and a half's work in total, with all the measuring underneath and planning out what we're going to do with this floor. And what we're about to do now is put the top layer on, at which point you're not going to see any of all that work. I bought and fitted a new blade since the cutting you saw earlier. It made a noticeable difference. Before I started screwing down, we had marked the positions of the batons so that I knew where I was aiming for, and also that'll be helpful when we come to fit the furniture, so we won't be fishing around trying to work out where we did put those supports. I took the trouble of drilling pilots and countersinks for the first 4 screws, after which I got lazy and established that they go in just as easily and almost as neatly by just going at it with the screws. I did also put some screws down the middle, but I think you've probably seen enough of me putting screws into a wood floor by now. And there we go, the floor is down. Day and a half's effort just to be able to see a floor, which isn't fantastically well fitted. I think we can safely say we could have done that better, but we also could have done it a lot worse. So it will do. We will be sealing around the edges. That's the most annoying thing, that we should have not cut the top board until we'd got everything else in place, because we've got that a bit short. That there will be an angle on the end, so it will be covered, but still a little bit annoying that we did that. But overall, it's down, it's functional. We can start on the next task. Bit of an odd angle to film at. I am lying on the ramp from where we can see the storage. Please don't look at the angles of those 2 middle uprights. One of them certainly isn't straight. I doubt either of them is. But they're secure, and what you can see there is that we've got actually more storage under there than we'd envisaged. Probably need a lip on this end because anything we put on there is on the slope and will slide out. We learnt some lessons during this process, and I've put a list of the main ones on the screen here.